Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good evening to everyone. I welcome you all back to today's explained session. As you know, every Friday live at 8 p.m. we have an explained session in which we do a deep dive into one of those topics that have been in the news in the last week or so and are extremely relevant from the UPSC examination point of view. As you have been reading the news in the past few days, there is no bigger topic in the country right now than the recent clashes between India and China at Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh. That is why in today's explained session, we will be discussing about the significance of Tawang, why exactly did the clashes take place, is there an ulterior motive that China is hiding, and also where exactly is India-China bilateral relationship headed. So without any further ado, let's begin the session for today. Also, I would like to remind you, we are doing this session on a very significant day. You know, this is 16th of December, also celebrated as a BYJU'S. This was the day that 1971 India-Pakistan war ended, also known as a war for the liberation of Bangladesh. So this is anyways a very momentous day for all the Indians, especially for those who are serving in the Indian Armed Forces. Now let's come back. As you know, just a couple of days back, India's Defense Minister made a statement in the Parliament saying that China tried to change the status quo. This is the language that has been used by the government of India over the past few years to define China's misadventure, China's entry into the Indian side. The government of India said that this face-off between India and China took place in the Tawang sector. Not just Tawang, Tawang sector. Meaning that it's not entirely within the city of Tawang, but a larger area which is called as a Tawang sector. Although the government of India or the army has not given the exact location of this clash, they have not told what exactly is the place where the clash took place. But a lot of experts and the people who know about this issue say that it is somewhere near here. If you go about northeast from Tawang, you will come here at the place called Yangtse, and this is where the clash actually took place. Again, all of this is just allegations because the government of India has not disclosed the official location of where exactly did it happen. That is why, although we will be discussing about what happened there, how many of our soldiers, how many of their soldiers were injured, but I would like to remind you all of this is just allegation as of now. I know since the last 2 days, there have been a lot of videos circulating on the social media. You see a lot of videos of Indian and the Chinese troops face to face, getting into fist fights, getting into beating each other with sticks, etc. Please do understand all of those videos are not representative of what happened in Tawang. There is no video that has come out from what has happened in Tawang. All those videos that you see going around the social media, that is of an incident that might have happened earlier. I'm not saying it's about the Galwan clashes, but it is certainly not a video of what happened in Tawang. So please do be advised and do keep that in mind. The reason being that most of the videos that you are seeing doing rounds on the social media seem to be of the daytime. However, as per the newspaper reports, again allegedly, this face-off, this clash took place in the middle of the night at about 3 a.m. on the 9th of December along the LAC in the Tawang sector. Now there are a lot of allegations that have been placed here. The point where the clash actually took place is called Yangtse. It is in the eastern Tawang center and it's a part of a disputed area between India and China. We will be discussing what exactly is a dispute about and where does that dispute actually lie. Now the government of India or the government of China for that matter have not disclosed the number of troops from either of the sides. However, this data that I am discussing with you today, we have taken it up from a special report in the Indian Express newspaper. Different newspapers give their different versions. So just in case you find a newspaper saying that there were 1,000 Chinese troops or 100 Chinese troops, please don't think that one of the information is wrong and the other is correct. All these are just allegations. So we are taking this data as of now from the Indian Express report. The Indian Express report says that there were about 300 Chinese troops that came onto the Indian side without any warning. in the middle of the night, and in a very, very short time period, about 80 Indian troops also mobilized quickly to push back the intruders. There was a news of hand-to-hand combat with sticks and canes for a few hours. There are news stories coming up that there were some soldiers that were injured that were flown to Guwahati for their treatment, but again their numbers have not been disclosed by the government. The government has said that there have been certain injuries, but what is the nature of those injuries? Serious or not, fractures or some other bruises, that has not been disclosed by the government, and neither has a number come out. So let's not put any allegations into that where the numbers have not come out. Now the interesting part is that China also has issued a statement in their own government media. However, as expected, China has a different version of the story. The Chinese government said that it was the Indian side that intruded onto the Chinese territory, and Chinese fought them off and Indians then came back. This is the Chinese version. They have not talked about any fist fight. They have not talked about any injury whatsoever. But this has always been the case with China. Even with the Galwan clashes, where the Indian side has always been extremely transparent with the information. The Indian government and the media always reports the number of soldiers who have sacrificed their life or who have been injured. From the Chinese side, this kind of information just never comes out for various reasons. One of the reasons, as per experts, is that China never wants to tell the world or its own people that they have lost even one soldier. So they try to create a false image that none of our soldiers can ever be harmed, that we are never in the wrong. So they never want to give away this message that some of our soldiers have been injured. Even with the Galwan Valley clashes, there has never been any official number from the side of the Chinese government. It was just a few months earlier that we got to know when China announced its military honors, and some of them were given military honors for their presence in the Galwan clashes. That is the only time that China has ever mentioned about any soldiers being involved even in the Galwan clashes. So you can't really expect China to disclose such information. So this kind of a reaction was as expected from China. Now, there are a lot of people saying a lot of different things. Why is it happening? What is happening right now? Is there a specific reason for that? Why has China chosen this particular time at a time that the two sides anyways are having multiple bilateral meetings to resolve the issue in Ladakh specifically? Now, many people are giving their own versions because all of these are just allegations and we can't pinpoint finger to one single instance. There are multiple reasons behind this. It is being said that the biggest reason behind why this intrusion happened from the Chinese side unexpectedly was that recently, as you know, there was a joint India-US military exercise at Oli in Uttarakhand. This was called Operation Yuddh Abhyas. This was November 15th that the exercise took place in Uttarakhand. Now you might ask, but how is China concerned with what is happening in Uttarakhand? Now in just a bit, we will discuss the map and the boundary line between India and China as well. Although it doesn't really come in the news a lot, but if you talk to China, the Chinese official will actually lay claims to certain territory in Uttarakhand as well. For the Chinese, even the border where the Uttarakhand state lies, even that is a disputed border for the Chinese. So for them, when India and US come together and hold a military exercise nearby the border area in Uttarakhand, Chinese view this as a threat. They say that we had actually signed multiple agreements with you, which specifically said no use of weapons near the border areas, and the Chinese say that India has gone against this agreement. They are referring to 1993 and 1996 agreements. These are bilateral agreements that specifically said no use of arms near the border areas, no intrusion from each other's side. If one of the people from any of the two sides goes into the other side, they would have to be given back immediately. China says that India went against this when they conducted this exercise. From India's point of view, what is the clarification? It's pretty simple. From India's point of view, Oli or entire state of Uttarakhand is India's own territory. We have sovereign rights over it. So where do we want to conduct an exercise? Or how do we want to conduct an exercise? With which nation do we want to conduct an exercise? That is none of China's concerns. So we don't have to take any permission from China for that matter whatsoever. China, however, does not really view this in that manner. China thinks that this is happening to give a signal to China because the participating country in that case was the US. Now the interesting part is, ever since the Galwan clashes have taken place, there have not really been much interaction between the top leadership of the two countries. The two leaders, that is Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, they came face to face in the SCO summit, if you remember. But in the SCO summit, there was no interaction between the two, there were no bilateral talks. Then in the recently held G20 summit in Indonesia, the two did exchange certain pleasantries, but there was no bilateral meeting that was held between the two sides. So yes, there was a moment where the two leaders came face to face, they shook hands, they exchanged pleasantries, but that was the only interaction that was held between the two leaders. It is now being seen as a step by China to not just change the status quo, but also to distract India. Now, distract India from where exactly? As you know, ever since India has officially been handed over the G20 presidency, the government of India has been making multiple efforts to get the world together, to place India at the center of the world as the G20 president, to decide the agenda for the upcoming meeting. In such a scenario, China also wants to remind India and the entire world that India is not such a stable or secure country, that we can also meddle in the internal affairs of India. These are some of the indications that China has actually put together. Now, there are other views that are also being given around the entire world. If you look at what is happening within China right now, this particular time for China is not that great, where the entire world has now almost moved on from COVID, where the entire world have realized that COVID is now a part of our lives and we cannot just eliminate this completely. China is still following its zero COVID policy, which has led to a huge amount of protest across the entire country. In fact, if you remember, we did cover these protests in some of the earlier sessions of Explained as well. At this point of time, the Chinese government seems to be under unprecedented pressure, not just from within their country, but from nations outside the Chinese government as well. Now, let me share with you a few examples. As you know, people across the country in China came out on the streets demanding removal of the zero COVID policy, demanding that we do not want to live under such shackles that have been imposed by the Chinese government. University students have come out on the grounds, in fact, as you can see here, by just waving plain A4 sheets of paper, indicating that the Chinese government does not allow its own people to speak anything. At the same time, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, specially changed the constitution to give himself a third term. As you know, the Chinese constitution only allows a maximum of 2 terms for the president. But especially for Xi Jinping, the constitution was amended, which effectively has made him a leader for life. Thus, whenever someone rises to such high powers, it is bound to upset a few people, not just outside but within the country as well. Thus, think of China and all the leaders in the Communist Party of China who would have thought that after Xi Jinping it would be their turn to become the president. And at a time that they see that Xi Jinping is just not ready to leave his position, he wants to continue even further, there are some objections even within the Chinese Communist Party. The interesting part is, because China is such a closed kind of a country, that not a lot about it is actually reported around the world media. But if you look at established newspapers or global newspapers, they are covering the news that there are some voices of discontent even within the Chinese Communist Party, where many leaders have actually tried to speak up against Xi Jinping, so he is under pressure from that as well. At the same time, because China is still following the policy of lockdowns, because they are still locking down industries, neighborhoods, entire cities whenever they are finding a few COVID cases. Their economy is still going through the same disruptions as the other world nations were actually facing in the last couple of years. At a time in 2020, 2021, when the entire world was actually witnessing a devastation of their economy, China was the only country that still had a positive growth. But now it is coming to harm them. At a time when other nations are now going ahead, aggressively increasing their economic output, China, on the other hand, as per most indicators, is witnessing a slowing down of the economy for multiple reasons. The biggest one being that because of the lockdown, you are closing down the industries, you are forcing the people to stay at home. And remember guys, China, unlike India, is a manufacturing country majorly. So in a country such as India, where a lot of people are actually involved in either agriculture, so they don't have to travel very far from their house, or they are involved in services. So most people who are involved in services do have this option that they can work from home, that they can just open up their laptop and start working from wherever they are. But when you talk about a manufacturing country, a country that thrives on manufacturing, that has these big plants that make everything for the entire world, in a manufacturing setup, there is no option of work from home. So when China closes down its industry, as compared to when India closes down its industry, it's a very different ball game altogether. In India, at least the people who are involved in the services sector can still continue to work in most cases. But in China, where most of the people are involved in manufacturing, they would have to take a major hit. And this is what is happening in China right now. The other part of the story is, why Tawang specifically? Now, I would be lying if I said that this is the first time that China has done this in Arunachal Pradesh, because China for a long time has been making very different claims about Arunachal Pradesh. Sometimes they say that entire Arunachal Pradesh is our territory. Sometimes they say Tawang is our territory. Then sometimes when people from Arunachal Pradesh, they want to visit China and they ask for a visa, China says, why do you need a visa for? You are our citizens only, you come here. So China has been given very different views about Arunachal Pradesh, about Tawang, and it seemed like they don't want to resolve this issue. Although from India's side, there's no issue at all in Arunachal Pradesh. It is our integral sovereign territory. But there's a connection specifically why Tawang is at the center of India-China focus. The reason being that China says that since Tibet is our territory, Tibet has had a deep connection with Tawang. How? Tawang is a birthplace of the 6th Dalai Lama. Not just this, the present Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, when he took refuge in India, when he thought that his life is in danger in Tibet, when China was conquering Tibet, and he came to India, India accepted him. He actually first went to Tawang and stayed for some days in Tawang only before he actually came up, and he then settled down in Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh. So Tawang has had a historic significance, especially for Tibet. And China says since Tibet is our integral territory, we also lay claim over Tawang. Now many people say this is a false claim, it is very, very weak. It does not have any historical significance, it does not have any evidence to back it up. But again, China does not need any of those things. India, on the other hand, has always agreed and has always understood that there is not even a chance of giving an inch of territory to China. In Arunachal Pradesh, it is our territory. It has always been a part of our territory. However, as I said earlier, India-China soldiers coming face to face is not a very uncommon occurrence if you look at McMahon Line, if you look at Arunachal Pradesh specifically. The Indian-Chinese soldiers have come face to face multiple times, but they have never been involved in a physical altercation. There may be some words exchanged, there may be some eye glares from one side to the other side, and then all of them actually went ahead. This physical contact and the level of physical contact where the defense minister himself has said that there have been certain injuries, this is unprecedented. And that is why it is a cause of concern. Even last October, patrol parties of PLA is the People's Liberation Army of China, and the Indian Army did come face to face at the same place in Yangtse, But there was no scuffle. In 2016 also the same thing had happened. The difference this time around is that there has been a physical altercation between the two sides. You also have to understand, ever since the Galwan clashes took place, in which 20 soldiers from our side were martyred, the relationship between the two sides has not been normal. There has hardly been any diplomatic contact. As I told you, the two leaders did attend the SCO summit. The two leaders did attend the G20 summit as well, but there have been hardly any significant exchanges that have happened at the very top leadership. There have been multiple meetings specifically for the Galwan issue to resolve that problem. But apart from that, there have not been very frequent contacts as it was seen prior to the Galwan problem. That has also taken a toll on the relationship between the two sides. Now, the day that the clashes took place, that was not the end of the story, because just a couple of days later, you saw all over the news story that the Indian Air Force has carried out a massive air exercise in the northeast part of the country, again very near to the line of actual control in Arunachal Pradesh. This has been seen in two ways. First, many people are saying that this might be a reaction to what has happened in the Tawang sector. Maybe this is India getting back. Maybe this is India showing its own strength. However, the government of India has said specifically that this was an exercise that was planned way back. So this was an exercise that was supposed to be carried out anyways, even before what happened between India and the Chinese troops. We anyways had to carry out this exercise. This is the Indian government's version of it. But again, many media reports are saying that this is not the case. This is a kind of a show of strength from our side, that we can also ensure that our Air Force can be ready within a moment's notice if they are required. If you look at the India-China boundary dispute, India and China share a long boundary. It is said that there are three sectors mainly where the two sides have certain disputes. These are called the Western sector. Western sector is where you actually see the clashes that took place, the Galwan clashes. This is where the Aksai Chin area lies. The Aksai Chin area, which has been illegally controlled by China. Then there is a middle sector. Middle sector is the one where this recent exercise between India and the US took place. The middle sector, as you know, it is a boundary of Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Although China still does not agree to this boundary, but the fact is, out of all these three sectors, the middle sector is the one where China talks about the least. They don't really point out towards a lot of issues. But with China, you never know. Today, they are in a mood to raise some other issue, so they'll raise some other issue as well. So you never know when they come up with such issue as well. The present clash that has taken place is here in the eastern sector. This blue line that you see here is called McMahon Line. This is in fact the side where, this is in fact the line or the area where the 1962 war was mainly fought. There are a lot of reasons why this has been an area of dispute. I'll give you one reason and you might be surprised to hear that. See, when the two countries are divided or whenever you draw a line on the map, technology has evolved a lot. Now when you have to divide two territories, now that you draw a line, today the lines can be very exact. You have the satellite imagery, you have lasers, you have every single technology that you require so that you can actually draw a boundary between the two sides which will be exact, which will be not in any dispute, it will be exact to 0.000 decimals. However, back in the day when this McMahon line actually first came into being, it was just a normal pen on the paper that was drawing a line. Experts say that the McMahon line that was drawn on the map by the use of pen, in real life, if you go on the ground, even the thickness of this line is close to 7 kilometers. On the ground, if you translate the thickness, that would be close to 7 kilometers. So 7 kilometers today on the ground can be a lot of territory. So when the two sides actually try to raise this issue, there can be a lot of implication, because again the thickness of the line when you draw it on the map, or when you used to draw it on the map, was a big concern. Although there are these three sectors where India and China have a border dispute, we'll mainly be focusing on the eastern sector, because this is where the recent clashes have taken place in the Tawang sector. If you look at the eastern sector, the boundary between the two sides is about 1140 kilometers. Towards the eastern limit of Bhutan, it goes to a point near Talu Pass, and at a tri-junction of Tibet, India and Myanmar, it's called the McMahon Line. Now, what is China's problem with McMahon Line? Let's try and understand this. This McMahon Line actually came into being in 1914 in what is called the Shimla Convention. Now, what does China say? China says that we never signed this agreement. Because we never signed this agreement, we will never accept this. As simple as that. This is where their reply ends. Now, if you look at the map once again, I'll take you back here. This territory that you see here, China, this is actually Tibet. Now, in today's context, because China controls the entire part of Tibet, so China can say, no, this is China only, this is not Tibet. But at a time, when this agreement, when the Shimla Convention actually came into being in 1914, it was Tibet as an autonomous region. So the representatives from Tibet were a part of this agreement. They did sign on the Shimla Convention, and that is how this McMahon Line came into being. China, on the other hand, says we were never a part of it. But the issue is, why was China supposed to be a part of it? It was never in the picture. It is later on that they occupied Tibet, that they have acquired Tibet, whatever word that you want to use. And now China says that without our concurrence, you cannot have this agreement. This is where the issue lies. That this McMahon Line, as you can see, China, or in bracket Tibet, who has the right to decide or to sign on the agreement where the line would lie. China says that they have the right, while we say that it was Tibet at that point of time, and representatives from Tibet had actually signed on this line. Now, this Shimla Convention of 1914, it was under the British rule that this convention took place, where British were the ones who were representing India, British were the ones who were representing even Myanmar, Burma as you call it at that point of time. Burma also, or Myanmar in today's language, was also ruled by the British only. So British were representing India, British were representing Myanmar, and they were representatives from Tibet, and that is how the line was made, as the agreement was signed in the form of Shimla Convention, where China was never a party, because again, they were never supposed to be a party over there. If you have to go even further in history, if you want to go back even further from 1914, how is it that the British were the ones who were taking care of this? If you know, British actually took control of Assam in 1826. That led to something called a Treaty of Yandabo, which concluded the first Anglo-Burmese War. The Anglo-Burmese War, under which the whole of Burma was given to British, and that had its border with China's Yunnan province. That is why the British thought it is their responsibility that between a territory controlled by China and the territory that was ruled by the British wanted to have an exact line, an exact demarcation between the two territories. And that is how the McMahon Line came into being, which China till today does not agree to, and that actually lies at the heart of this entire issue. Now, if you look at what has been happening at the border between India and China, not just in Tawang, if you look at what is happening at the Galwan Valley also, since 2020, ever since those clashes took place, we actually have seen the two sides coming together and try to resolve these issues at what you call as the friction points. Now, what exactly are friction points? Friction points specifically are those areas where the two sides disagree, or the two sides have come face to face in the Galwan clashes. As you know, there have been multiple talks that have taken place since then. although the government of India, and for obvious reasons, has never disclosed the entire exact details of what happened, the location, etc. But now with the help of a lot of geostrategic experts, we do have a fair bit of idea about the place where the clash actually took place. And I'm sure you would have seen many of the diagrams, and I'll show you in just a bit. The two sides, as a part of their engagement, recently have decided that we must create certain buffer zones between the two armies to make sure that the Galwan-like situation does not arise again. So there are some areas such as Pangong Lake, Galwan, Gogra, Hot Springs, etc. Nearby these areas, a buffer area has been created. Buffer area means an area where both the sides will not be present, an area where both the armies will not go. So till this point, if China patrols, Indian army will patrol till this point, and in between somewhere there is the buffer zone. Now there are various interpretations of this, and I'll give you all the interpretations. First interpretation, the people who are critical of the government. Many people in India who are criticizing the government are saying that India earlier used to patrol till this point. These are the government's critics, that India used to patrol till this point. So by creating a buffer zone, India actually has given away certain territory where no one is coming. From the side of the government, they are saying, no, that has not been the case. India used to patrol till this area only. So there are different interpretations that are happening. In fact, you see, even in the ongoing winter session of the parliament, the opposition parties are creating a ruckus, saying that whenever there has been an issue between India and China in the past, the governments have always had open debates. The governments have always taken views of people in the opposition as well. But as per the opposition members, the current government does not want to have an open debate, an open discussion about what has happened in Tawang or what happened earlier in the Galwan Valley. Now, apart from these, and I'll just show you a map in just a bit to tell you where the buffer area is, there are certain other issues at the border as well. One big issue is about China's infrastructure development. If you look at history of China and the nations with which they have had their border disputes, you can talk about land disputes or maritime disputes. China has usually followed the same kind of policy. They come up and start building artificial infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is built, then they start claiming this is our area because our infrastructure has been built. Look at what has happened in Tawang. Just nearby the place where the clashes have taken place, there is an artificial Chinese village that has been set up, and many news stories will actually tell you. There is an artificial village that China has set up in the past. A village specially designed so that there can be permanent settlement of people at the border. Usually these permanent settlements are used by soldiers only. Again, ideally the nations would not want their civilians to live very close to the border, especially when the borders are disputed. But on the other hand, China wants to do the entire opposite thing. If you go back to 1950s, how China illegally got control of Aksai Chin area, that was also the same kind of policy that China applied. They started building roads, they started building highways, and before the government could notice, they actually started to claim lay over that territory of Jammu and Kashmir at that point of time. Not just the land border. Talk about the maritime borders as well. You talk about the South China Sea issue that China has with various nations. What China has been doing is, again, the same thing. They build their artificial islands in the South China Sea. When they build all those islands, they say, now this is our territory. So exclusive economic zone that is 200 nautical miles from this area is again our territory. And slowly, they have actually tried to control the entire South China Sea. This is again an issue that they have. With respect to India, China, you will also hear one very interesting phrase time and time again. There is a phrase called salami slicing. Now, salami is also a word that is used to describe certain things that you eat. Now, what exactly is salami slicing? Experts say that when China wants to acquire some territory illegally, as has been happening between India and China, They don't just come up and occupy a large amount of territory. If this is the Chinese border today, what they will do is, for a few months, they will just acquire this territory. And they will just wait and see what happens. They will wait for 6-7 months and then they will see, oh, nothing happened. Means the government has not realized. Then they will claim that this is our border now. After 6 months, if nothing happens, then they will slice off one more part, this part. They will say, now this is our border. This is called salami slicing. Just slicing the territory bit by bit, just small amount of territory. They keep on adding to their own country. That is a technique that China has been following for a long time. It's nothing new. And the same they have tried to apply at Indian border as well. Not just this, the number of troops that have been deployed by China at the border has increased drastically. See, the number of troop deployment, when it increases, it is a sure shot indication that there is something that is actually brewing up at the border. Because when you know the border is settled, when you know the border is peaceful, there is no need to have a lot of troops in the border area. So not only have they built a lot of infrastructure without letting the other side know, they have also made sure that the number of troops that actually remain there have increased considerably. This is a photo that you would have seen multiple times, I'm sure, ever since the Galwan clashes occurred. This is about the fingers, finger number 1, finger 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, these finger-like structures are the structures at the Pangong Tso Lake. This is the bank. Now, as per the government, from point number 4 to point number 8, both the sides have agreed to create a buffer. That is, both the sides have said that we will not come here for patrolling. The Chinese have agreed that, okay, we will stay till here for patrolling, and the Indian side have said, okay, we will stay till here for patrolling. But again, it is not an agreement that has become so concrete because both the sides still are suffering from a lack of trust from the two sides. The two sides have agreed that, okay, we will create a buffer. Experts say, especially the people who have been criticizing the government for its action, experts say that earlier the Indian army was actually going till point number 8 and now they have been restricted till point number 4 only to create a buffer zone between the two. This is the LAC, the line of actual control, as has been marked by red. This is Galwan Valley. PP14 means patrol point number 14. So there are different names that are given here. Also, please understand, the border that we have between India and China, be it in the eastern sector, the western sector, etc., it's not as easy to understand. It's not a border just on the land. It's a very difficult area. There are mountains, there are hills, there are rivers. So how do you divide mountains between the two sides? How do you divide these lakes between the two sides? That has always been a challenge. It's not as easy to demarcate area when it is in these kind of terrains, and that is why the part of the problem that we have in the Galwan Valley clashes also, the news that came out was that the reason why so many soldiers lost their life from either side was because of the terrain. There was a hilly terrain, there was slope, there was a river nearby that was actually flowing at sub-zero temperature. So that's a very difficult terrain and a very difficult topography to be a part of. In that terrain, in that topography, to actually identify a border between the two sides, to draw a line is almost impossible. And that is why we have been seeing that issues between the two sides have come in time and time again. Now, it's not that the two sides have cut down all their communication ever since the Galwan clashes have happened. If you look at the trade between the two sides, for example, India and China trade is still increasing, despite the government suggesting that we would not invite a lot of Chinese products, we would have also banned a lot of Chinese equipment, especially the ones that were involved in 5G testing, etc. But the fact remains that the trade relations between the two have increased considerably. We are still seeing as many commodities from China coming into India as they were doing earlier. The problem is that at the very top level, the Indian Prime Minister, the Chinese President, there the meetings have not happened as frequently as they were happening earlier. Remember earlier there was these informal summits that happened where Xi Jinping came to India a couple of times, where Prime Minister Modi also went to China once for these informal summits without any specific agenda, just to ensure that the two sides come close to each other. Those kind of meetings especially have not happened for a long time, ever since the Galwan clashes have occurred. There are a lot of reasons behind that, which is very obvious. As I told you, the two sides did come face to face in the ongoing G20 summit. There were handshakes, but nothing else. Now the interesting part is, India right now holds the presidency of two extremely important organizations. G20, as we all know, but SCO also. Both these are organizations where India and China both are part. And both are the organizations where India does hold the presidency right now. Does it mean that India would now have an opportunity to open up more bilateral communication lines? Or right now does India believe that communication will not really have an impact, because China right now has made such a policy that communication is not the way to go, that they are just looking to acquire territory and they are just looking to ensure that the relationship between the two sides just don't become better. There is one more aspect of the story which I would like to give you here. Many experts say that if you look at China specifically, historically they have had border issues with multiple nations. It's not just with India. You look at China's map, they border a lot of nations. With Mongolia, for example, they have settled all their border disputes. The one country with which they have not settled the border disputes, especially, is India. And it also seems to be a long-term strategy of China. They don't want the border to be settled. They think that this is a good way to keep distracting India whenever India tries to think big. Whenever India tries to think something beyond our neighbors, come out at the international level, establish ourselves as a world power. Maybe China uses this as a ploy to keep on distracting India, to keep on telling India that, hello, you have to focus here at the border, don't focus anywhere else. This is also a view that has been given by multiple geostrategic experts. Whether this is true or does China not think this way, it's anyone's guess. There is no clarity from either of the two sides. This was our today's explained session. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot of new things today. Do let us know in the comment section what are the other kind of topics that you would want us to discuss with you in the next explained session. If you have still not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do hit the subscribe button, and also make sure that you attend all the other initiatives that we keep on bringing for you at our YouTube channel. Make sure that you share all of these, especially the explained sessions also, with all your friends who are preparing for the UPSC examination. I hope all your preparation is going well. Thank you so much for watching. Good night. Jai Hind.